Action.
Okay, where's the mood? Okay, so as far as the mood.
Wait,
what's this?
let's
Oh,
just do a brief, tell them what the story might be about.
Okay, so this story is actually pretty long, but it is this dude who is kind of reflecting upon his relationship with his brother, who at the beginning of the story had just been put into jail for like heroin usage and possession. And so kind of the whole story is a reflection on their sort of growth and maturity as they're going up in like the streets of Harlem, and how one brother kind of went like one way and the other brother kind of like went the other way. Like the first brother, the one who's narrating, was like went into the army. He teaches algebra. Like he's kind of like, I don't know.
They said he kind of escaped in a way.
Yeah, so the story kind of is like focusing on like how he like was able to escape that sort of like, I think they talk a little bit about like generational trauma as well. Whereas the other brother was trying to escape it in another sort of route through like drug usage, and but then towards the end they kind of relate the escapism to his music career. So before he kind of goes down that path of like drug addiction, he kind of tells his brother like, I want to be a musician, and his brother's like, weird. And then he kind of like starts to spiral and he like runs away from all of his problems. But then at the end it's kind of beautiful in that they finally kind of cross the bridge between their relationship and are able to relate to each other, and the brother who's narrating kind of finally like truly listens to the other brother and is trying to gain more of an understanding as to like what he's really been through, and not just looking at him like, oh, like you're just an addict, like I was able to escape this, how come you weren't, sort of thing. I don't know anything else. Okay, we'll start.
Okay, the mood. So overall, I think the mood was pretty like mellow, but then also the words that he used, like I highlighted a few things where I feel like the setting and the literary elements that I chose to highlight kind of overlapped. And it was pretty much like, what did I don't know, I'll just go off my brain. But pretty much like how Keegan said about generational trauma. I feel like that for me, that is what kind of carried the entire story. Because if I don't put it on my notes,
It's 40 pages long.
Yeah,
I don't know if you're gonna be able to find it.
somewhere he was talking about like how he had felt like he had an ice cube in his stomach or something like that.
Yeah, that's at the very beginning.
That's at the very beginning when he finds out.
Yeah, okay, so he brings that up like a couple times in the story, and at some point he was like, he felt like it was melting and it was gonna explode and all his guts were gonna start coming out. And the way that he was describing that, I feel like as far as generational trauma and mental health, I can kind of relate it to like, I'm sure it could be the same in like with all minority groups. I can't really speak, you know, but I can speak for a lot of black families, like mental health isn't really taken very seriously, and so maybe whenever he was describing that pit that he had in his stomach, that could have been something like he could have had anxiety and not knew what it was, and I feel like that kind of shaped the mood for their entire story. And then also how what's it called? How he was talking about how everybody, like a lot of the boys that he saw that was growing up, like during that time that the story took place, he saw that they were going through the exact same things that was going on a long time ago, and maybe like it was just like generational trauma and it kept on happening, and that's like very unhealthy. It's gonna keep on going, and then they're developing, because they're in that environment, different like anxiety and stuff like that they can't really know how to handle.
Kind of jumping down to the second question a little bit about literary elements. You mentioned the whole thing about the ice cube, and I think that throughout the entire story, Baldwin uses like motifs of like temperature and how that is going to shape the rest of the story. So like when he finds out that his brother was arrested, he's got this giant ice cube and it follows him around and he's like wet with sweat and it's cooling him. But then when his brother's like talking about like his heroin usage, he's like, it made me feel warm inside, like it made me feel all these things. And then there's like more at the end, but it's too long to kind of try and like look for, but it's there, where he kind of reincorporates the ice and then the water and the temperature, and he's like, the ice was finally like melting, like he could understand it. And so I think by using that kind of vivid description, it's something that I think a lot of us can like we relate to, because like regardless of like if you relate to the story itself, I think you can sort of say like, oh, like ice in the pit of my stomach, but like, you know, like when you're happy you're like warm. So I think by using that kind of language, that really like shapes the whole tone. So even though I think when you would be reading something they're talking about like warmth and sunlight, you would instinctually be like, oh, the mood's kind of happy, but Baldwin kind of does something of the opposite, I think, and it's very interesting because he takes it and it's kind of tense all the way throughout, whereas it's like a what happened, like is his brother okay, like what's gonna happen, what's gonna be the outcome. But then like when he's talking about like the warmth of like his drug usage, it's almost like sorrowful, and it's kind of with a reflection that the brother is like, he just feels so utterly like bad and like hopeless almost, that he just can't do anything else for his brother. And I think it contrasts the word choice very nicely.
So like I think the setting plays a big part, because growing up in Harlem, and like the story wouldn't make sense if it wasn't there. So in Harlem they already have to go through like daily struggles of just being there and dealing with like girls. They said like girls who like are prostitutes or like just drug dealers and stuff like that. So that already plays a part. And then the mood of like them arguing and dealing with a heroin addict, and like all that just plays a big part in how it's a generational trauma, and it just keeps on going, because once you're in that cycle it's hard to get out of, and like your parents live there and all your entire family. So that's why they're saying like to escape it, it would be like you could escape it in the world, but you still are stuck in your head like with that same like mentality of being there. So that's why like he is a heroin addict, but he will be that wherever you go. So it was up to him to change it, and like that's how they showed at the end how Jazz helped him like get out of that cycle, and just there you go.
So like another thing about like word choice is that he uses darkness a lot when talking about, I think, drug usage. He uses it in the beginning when like the guy who knew Sonny comes up to him. He says that he was like hiding in the shadows, and like they only knew two darknesses, and that and then even when like they were talking about like the family all sitting in the couch on like a Sunday afternoon, and they said like then darkness came and everyone went silent because the parents knew what was coming. And then when Sonny's finally opening up at the very end, when he's opening up about drug usage to his brother, he's like he says that, oh, like darkness will be coming soon, and then he like Sonny goes into like this like repetitive sentence where it can come back. And so I think like that also plays like a big thing, like with like repeating different words in it to like mean the same meaning, like the temperature thing. It's like it's like, you know, like when you're like sad or something, you say like he's like fallen in the darkness. So I think he used darkness here to show what Sonny was falling into, or what other people can fall into when like drugs come around, I guess.
Also, I think there's a contrast with the way that he describes light as well, the darkness versus the light, because it's like when the mom is like talking about how the dad's like brother got killed, it's like there's a moon out that night. So yeah. It's like in the rest of the story he was using like, oh, in the warmth of the sun he looked like this, like his copper eyes, and like very descriptive. But in like the night that his brother got killed, there was a moon. And so I kind of thought that was like really symbolic of, it was like kind of a false hope sort of thing. So it's like, yeah, it was bright outside, but it wasn't like actual like sun and warmth and like growth and all the things that you typically associate with the sun. So I thought that was interesting. And then also if popping back to like the sort of like generational trauma sort of thing, like where you rely on your family and you just kind of want to get out of that and not kind of perpetuate those things anymore. I thought at the very end where they introduce, what was his name? The like other player in the jazz band.
Creole?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Creole. And I thought that was really significant. So to me, that was kind of saying like there was a disconnect, like a mood of like a disconnect the entire sort of story where the older brother's just really trying to like get to know the younger brother, but neither of them know where to start. But then when he steps into this nightclub, it's like automatically the older brother's able to see that Sonny's made really deep, meaningful connections. And then he's kind of like, Creole has kind of like taken on that position as kind of like a fatherly, like, or like paternal sort of way. And that he says like, there was a line, like, he looked about him as the last time as though he were making certain that all his chicks were in the coop. And to me, I thought that was kind of really, it like struck me that was like, this was the end of the story and like they had gone through those problems, but triumphed, right? Like, Sonny the entire time had kind of been dealing with not really being able to find his place, and Creole kind of like took him under his wing and was able to like kind of show him the way out of those kind of like darker pathways.
So two things that both of y'all said that I want to touch on. So first, how you were talking about the big brother, little brother relationship. Earlier in the story, he said, I caught him just before he fell when he took his first steps he ever took in this world. So that was a bit earlier in the story. And so he was kind of reminiscing a little bit about how he had his back before he could have his own, and kind of like have that big brother, like protective, like in that moment he had a big heart and was like remembering how whenever they were little, of course, like they had a stronger relationship, but as they got older, they grew apart. And then also about the darkness, he said, we live in a housing project. It hasn't been up long. A few days after it was up, it seemed uninhabitably new. Now, of course, it's already run down. Then he said, it looks like a parody of the good, clean, faceless life. God knows the people who live in it do their best to make it a parody. So for that, that kind of showed me how there have been times where I've had discussions with people about how the like more urban cities and the ghetto, I guess, is kind of more of a mindset than it is a place. And that kind of goes back, we're talking about generational trauma a lot, but that goes back into that, because if you don't know how to get out of that way of living, then that is going to continue to come up throughout time, and it's just going to keep on, it's going to affect how you see your environment, and your environment affects your mindset. If you sleep in a clean room, you're going to wake up feeling happier than you do if you go to sleep in the like it kind of plays.
And to like talk about like the theme or the message, I think that like the biggest thing is that like it's just seeing eye to eye on other people's escapes. So like from trauma, like some people's, like in like modern times, some people's might be like therapy, while another person's might be just, you know, spending a day alone watching a movie and eating ice cream. So that's your escape. And I think what Sonny and his brother had to learn is, or what specifically his brother had to, the narrator had to learn, is that Sonny had his own escape to what he was going through, and it necessarily did not need to be his brother's escape, which was an education and getting out actually, and like going up in the like capitalist world, I guess. But Sonny, you know, really found his way through music and found his way through art, and I still don't think that the narrator, like, because in the very end, like the last like page, it's just like to me when I was reading it, it seemed like a humongous like just like roller coaster, to where like the narrator finally, it's just like it's all coming to him, and he's like, oh, and I saw this and I saw this, and I just appreciate everything like that. And like when I was like, it just felt like that, like this big, like, you know, like coming into like the light thing and seeing what was happening. And I think that's the big thing is that he finally like embraced Sonny's escape, and so that they could almost, like escape together, because Sonny obviously knew what his brother's escape was because his brother constantly reminded him of what his was, and he wanted it to be the same. So I think that's the big message, is to like not everyone has to react to the trauma that you do, and everyone has their own escape. So.
All right.
You look